Have you ever wondered if you're really thinking or just following instructions? What if your entire mindset was shaped by a pattern you never chose? And what if the path you believe will lead to happiness is, in fact, a loop with no exit? Linear. Thinking is the kind of mindset that moves in a straight, logical line. It assumes that everything happens for a reason, in a fixed sequence. One cause leads to one effect. You begin at point A, move to B, then C, D, and so on, until you reach the so-called destination. This way of thinking dominates our modern society. It's taught in schools, used in corporations, integrated into technology, and reinforced in daily life. It seems practical, easy to explain, easy to measure, easy to teach. And that's exactly why it's so seductive. But here's the trap. Most people don't even realize they're trapped in it. They think they're thinking freely, while actually just repeating a formula. When someone hits a setback, the default question is always, how do I fix this? That's linear thinking at work. Problem? Find a solution. Failure? Build a better strategy. Suffering? Identify the cause and eliminate it. It all sounds reasonable. But this very reasonableness creates an invisible maze where the mind circles endlessly between cause and effect, seeking answers that don't exist in that frame. Because life, real life, is not a formula to be solved. It cannot always be dissected, measured, controlled, or optimized. Emotions aren't always logical. Not every action leads to a clear result. And some questions, they're not meant to be answered. Linear thinking breaks the world into separate, clean slices, but misses the whole picture. It can't grasp the irrational, the spontaneous, the poetic. It can't touch what's alive, but can't be put into words. A person who lives entirely by this model becomes rigid, quick to judge, incapable of deep listening, detached from beauty. They approach everything like a problem to be solved, even love, sadness, or silence. They run their lives like machines, efficient, productive, but hollow. Worse still, linear thinking plants the illusion that truth lies ahead, like a prize waiting at the finish line. Follow the steps, stick to the plan, and you'll arrive at happiness, or success, or even enlightenment. But life doesn't work like that. What we'll explore in this video goes beyond knowledge. We'll see how linear thinking doesn't just limit what you know. It drains your capacity to feel, to surrender, to be fully alive. It's not wrong, per se. It's just too narrow to hold the depth and chaos of real living. And here's the thing, most of us never question it. We think we're learning to think, but in truth, we're being taught how not to. From early childhood, we're told that if we do action A, we'll get reward B. Make mistake C, face punishment D. This chain of cause and effect becomes the blueprint of how we think. Over and over, this structure repeats in homework, in grades, in how adults interact with children. But no one ever tells us that a single action might lead to 100 different outcomes, or maybe none at all. No one explains that parts of life are simply unknowable, and no one dares to say some things don't need thinking, they need seeing. Our education system is built on this linear mold. One problem, one correct solution. One essay, 3 parts. Intro, body, conclusion. One test, one grading scale. Even creativity is boxed into rubrics, and yet, what if the most vital things can't be measured? Take a moment to reflect. Has your thinking truly been your own, or has it been quietly shaped by a system you never saw? In the next part, we'll explore how this invisible programming doesn't just limit our thoughts, but reshapes our emotional world, our sense of freedom, and our ability to be present with the richness of life itself. As we saw earlier, linear thinking narrows the vastness of life into a predictable path. But it doesn't stop at thoughts. It quietly rewires how we learn, live, and even love. From a young age, we're taught that everything must follow a process. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Complete them correctly, and you'll be rewarded. Maybe with high grades, maybe with praise. Thinking becomes something we use to achieve, to perform, to win. It gets packaged into techniques and systems, turning what was once a spontaneous river of insight into a rigid pipeline aimed at results. The tragedy? We forget that thinking was once wild, fluid, mysterious, and alive. It's not just education that molds us. Media, culture, and especially social networks bombard us with ready-made thought structures. 3 ways to succeed, 5 habits of the rich, 7 steps to happiness. Over time, these become more than advice. They become reality itself. Slowly but surely, they reinforce a seductive illusion. Life is like a machine. Input the right formula, and out comes success, joy, or whatever outcome you desire. But real life refuses to follow that script. It twists and bends. It interrupts and derails. It surprises, contradicts, and refuses to fit in neat little boxes. Life isn't a program. It's a dance of chaos and beauty. And yet, linear thinking doesn't just act like a mental habit. It becomes a kind of training for our consciousness. The longer we're conditioned to think in just one way, the more we forget that it is just one way. We mistake the method for nature itself, and that perhaps is the most dangerous part. Because when you don't realize your mind has been shaped, how can you choose anything else? Have you ever noticed that your most inspired, awakened, or deeply emotional moments don't unfold step by step? When you fall in love, do you analyze your way into feeling? When grief hits, do you reason your way into sorrow? Of course not. Truthful emotions, deep insights, and beauty never follow a formula. And yet, because we've been programmed so deeply, we try to apply structure even to the unstructured. Even in love, we set expectations. In relationships, we define goals. We measure affection with progress and assign meaning with metrics. But the problem isn't just the systems around us. It's the fact that our minds have become so conditioned, we don't even notice we've been conditioned. We don't need to abandon linear thinking entirely. It has its place. But we do need to become aware of its grip, not to fight it, but to stop relying on it as our only instinct. Once you can observe your thinking as a system, rather than your essence, you open a space within, a space for feeling, presence, and listening to something wordless. Because when linear thinking takes over the entire mental landscape, it doesn't just limit creativity, it turns us into machines, always scanning for outcomes. We stop living in the now and start monitoring every moment to see, am I improving? Am I progressing? Is this working? We filter every experience through the question, what am I getting from this? And where is this taking me? And that, ironically, is the most passive way to live. Because every action becomes a reaction to an imagined future result. We don't speak because our hearts overflow. We speak to be validated. We don't learn out of curiosity. We study for the certificate. We don't meditate to be present. We meditate with a future reward in mind. Life becomes a long pursuit of outcomes, not an experience to be felt. The mind, under this spell, becomes like a metal detector, constantly scanning, but only responding when it detects value. A soft breeze, a glance from a stranger, the silence between breaths, these quiet wonders pass unnoticed because they don't lead to anything. But what if those were the very moments that made us alive? Let's continue and uncover how we can begin loosening this mental programming, not by force, but by seeing through it. As we explored earlier, when the mind is conditioned to chase outcomes, it starts scanning reality through a narrow filter, searching, not for presence, but for payoff. The tragic result? The present moment begins to disappear. If something doesn't seem useful, the mind quietly dismisses it. A fleeting moment of stillness, a meaningless laugh, a breath taken without purpose. all fade into the background. The ability to fully live each moment is gradually eroded. And worse, when the mind becomes obsessed with results, it doesn't just observe life, it starts reshaping it. It can't let things be as they are. It must constantly adjust, optimize, manipulate. Even the people around us are no longer seen as living beings, but as instruments for satisfaction, tools to generate a feeling of love or a sense of importance or the illusion of being right. Eventually, even we ourselves cease to be human in our own eyes. We become a project, an endless self-improvement task, a daily effort to become better. That's why so many people today feel deeply exhausted, even when no one is forcing them to overwork. The pressure doesn't come from outside. It's internal. The mind is always comparing, always measuring, always whispering. Not enough yet. The filter of expectation never turns off. Even in rest, the thoughts sneak in. Is this break good for my health? Am I wasting time? Even doing nothing gets dragged into analysis. And so, without ever noticing, life is drained from within. Not because we lack food, shelter, or safety, but because no moment is ever allowed to just be. Every second must be evaluated, rated, labeled. A conversation must build intimacy. A lesson must bring progress. A kind gesture must reinforce our identity as a good person. Everything becomes a stepping stone towards something else. And the silent metal detector in our heads never stops beeping. Love, by its very nature, is vast. It's wild, fluid, unmeasured. It flows without needing a reason. But when linear thinking enters the space of love, it begins to warp it. Love turns into a transaction, a conditional exchange. No longer do we love to live. We live in order to be loved. From an early age, many of us absorbed a dangerous lesson. If I behave, I'll be accepted. If I do well, I'll be praised. Thus begins a pattern. Love becomes entangled with performance. We grow to believe, if I'm kind enough, attentive enough, patient enough, surely I'll be loved in return. But life does not run on formulas. People are not equations. There is no guaranteed return on emotional investment. So when we give all we have, kindness, presence, effort, even sacrifice, and the other person doesn't respond as we expect, the disappointment cuts deeper than just hurt feelings. It shakes our entire framework. The mind cries out, but I did everything right. So why didn't it work? This is more than heartbreak. It's a collapse of a belief system. Linear thinking turns love into a calculated game where giving too much is seen as losing, being too vulnerable is a weakness, and showing affection first is a strategic misstep. Even authentic feelings are edited down to fit a strategy. How do I love more efficiently? How do I avoid appearing needy? In the end, we no longer show up honestly in our relationships. We manage them. We tweak, adjust, and maneuver in hopes of eliciting a desired reaction. Love becomes a carefully staged performance, rehearsed and directed for maximum effect. There is little room left for spontaneity, for breath, for soul. Even in the depth of loving someone, we find ourselves secretly asking, is this person worth the effort? Will this lead anywhere? Should I keep investing or walk away? Let's go further and see how this mindset doesn't just shape our relationships, but also reshapes the way we see ourselves and what it truly means to live freely. In the previous part, we saw how love can lose its depth when it becomes a performance. But what happens when even our questions are shaped by linear thinking? When the mind asks, where is this going? It's not a question born from presence. It's a demand from logic. Linear thought doesn't step into love unless it knows what it will get in return. But love has no destination. It's not a project with a timeline or a target. It only exists here and now, or it isn't love at all. What hurts the most in love isn't rejection. It's the haunting confusion that comes when we believe we did everything right and still didn't receive what we thought we deserved. Linear thinking breaks down in these moments. It doesn't know how to heal, only how to repeat. So it recycles the same pattern in the next relationship. Tweak the behavior, select a more compatible partner, try again, still chasing an I outcome. But the root problem remains. We love in order to gain something. True change begins the moment we stop trying to be loved and start learning how to be present in love, without a reason, without a reward. Love isn't something to be earned through the correct actions. It's a stream you step into without needing to control the current. In that space, love returns to its original nature. There is no ownership. No one owes anyone anything. No one must meet a standard in order to receive, and this principle doesn't apply only to love. Even in the realm of creativity, where freedom should reign, linear thinking quietly creeps in and takes control. Across every field, from science to art to our personal lives, we long to create. We crave new ideas, original expressions, lives that don't repeat themselves. Yet ironically, we often try to manufacture creativity using the same rigid structure we use for everything else. We chase creative frameworks, 5-step methods, productivity systems. We study the routines of creative people as if creativity could be copied like a recipe. But in doing so, we step into the very trap that stifles creativity. Because creativity, by its essence, isn't a straight line. It doesn't follow time. It doesn't repeat. It doesn't obey logic. The most surprising, inspired ideas don't arrive in meetings or brainstorming sessions. They come in the quiet moments, in the shower, on a walk, lying on the couch, or deep inside a dream. Why? Because in those moments, the mind stops searching, and space opens for something new to arrive. Linear thinking can't tolerate that space. It needs structure, clear goals, scheduled progress, timelines, metrics. It constantly asks, where are we now? What's next? When will we finish? But ideas don't answer to pressure. They don't bloom under supervision. They don't emerge because you tried hard. They arrive when the mind releases control. And that's why, the harder many people push for creativity, the more blocked they become. They stare at the blank page. They force their brains to come up with something original. But the more they force, the more they recycle the past. They think they're innovating, but they're just dressing up old patterns in fresh clothes. In the end, what they produce, though labeled as new, is merely a repackaging of what already exists, polished and safe. Real breakthroughs, on the other hand, come like unexpected visitors. No warning, no logic, no plan. They are born from emptiness, from stillness, from a space where the mind no longer acts like a factory. And that creative space, it's not found in a workspace. It's found in a state of mind that no longer feels the need to prove itself. Let's keep going, because in the next part, we'll explore what happens when even spirituality gets absorbed into the logic of achievement, and how to reclaim something sacred in the noise. In the last part, we saw how creativity dies the moment it's forced to follow a path. But what happens when that same rigid thinking enters the spiritual path, the very journey meant to transcend it? Linear thinking cannot tolerate stillness without purpose. It starts fidgeting, demanding an outcome. It asks, if I sit here doing nothing, how will anything ever get done? And with that single question, the door to true creativity and true presence shuts. The act of creating becomes a production line, a checklist, a series of metrics. And the sacred mystery of not knowing, where real inspiration lives, is replaced by urgency and pressure. But the truth is, the most genuine ideas don't need a plan to arrive. They appear quietly, without reason, not because we chased them, but because we stopped chasing. They surface like a ripple in a silent pond, stirred by something deeper than logic. And their uniqueness lies in the fact that they're not repeats. They come from places beyond repetition. To be truly creative is not to think harder or faster. It's to step outside the familiar path. Not to have better ideas, but to let go of the old ways of thinking altogether. Now imagine, if even creativity, an act rooted in freedom, gets absorbed into the machinery of linear thought, what happens when that mindset enters the realm of spirituality? This is where the distortion runs deep. Because when the spiritual journey is treated like a self-improvement program, its aliveness quietly fades. What was once a path of awakening becomes a performance. Prayer, meditation, chanting. These sacred acts, instead of being doorways to inner stillness, turn into spiritual transactions. People begin to calculate, if I repeat this mantra 300 times a day, how long until I feel something? They meditate not to be present, but to track progress. And so even silence becomes another item on the productivity list. Worse, many approach spiritual life the way someone might purchase an insurance policy. If I live morally, eat clean, give to charity, then I'll be safe after death, right? And when they don't get results, they switch methods, change teachers, try different techniques, not unlike an investor chasing a better return. In this frame, spirituality becomes a goal to be won, not a state to be lived. Each breath, each mindful step, each sacred teaching is no longer an invitation to presence, but a tool aimed at some imagined enlightenment. And once the goal takes center stage, the present moment fades into the background. The practitioner stops living in the teachings and begins living for what they hope the teachings will eventually deliver. The path loses its soul. The sacred is reduced to a strategy. Even spiritual institutions often unknowingly reinforce this mindset. They present teachings as structured programs. Stage 1, concentration. Stage 2, purification. Stage 3, wisdom. Stage 4, liberation. It sounds clear, even comforting. But the mind, trained in progress and comparison, immediately turns it into a scorecard. Suddenly, people begin to measure themselves. Where am I on the path? Am I 50% enlightened? How far left to go? And the more theories and steps we stack, the further we drift from the simplicity of being. The more we seek to master the process, the less we live the practice, because the path of truth is not a competition. It's not a road with a finish line waiting at the end. It's not a game to be won, where effort guarantees reward. So what happens? If we carry this "I'll do this to get that" mindset into every step of the spiritual path, let's pause for a moment, and in the next part we'll go deeper into that very question and uncover the subtle trap that keeps even the most sincere seekers stuck without knowing why. Previously, we touched on how even the spiritual path can be reduced to a checklist, turning sacred practices into transactional routines. But real liberation doesn't come as a prize for effort. It arrives only when the mind stops demanding any prize at all. So what happens when the journey is no longer about progress? What remains when there's no fixed route, no timeline, no expectation? To improve? Most people, when they hear the word wisdom, immediately think of sharp intellect, a heightened ability to solve problems, analyze quickly, or understand complex ideas. But that's only the surface. It's wisdom defined by linear standards, faster thinking, more accumulation, greater performance. In that world, wisdom is something you can measure. You're wise if you know more facts, if you reason faster, if your arguments are more precise. But what if there's a completely different form of wisdom, one that doesn't live on a timeline? A kind that doesn't grow through collecting more, but through letting go. That's non-linear wisdom. It's not about knowing more. It's about seeing differently. It doesn't operate by building knowledge step by step. It shatters the steps entirely. This kind of wisdom doesn't arrive through mastery, but through a quiet shift in perception. Imagine this. You're peering through a dirty window, trying to see clearly. You think you need to clean each smudge, but then something clicks. You realize you don't need to clean the glass. You simply need to look past it. The clarity doesn't come from more effort, but from abandoning the old way of seeing. There are moments in life where the harder we think, the more lost we feel. The more we analyze, the more confused we become. Then suddenly, without trying, in a pause free from effort, clarity dawns. Not the answer itself, but a realization that changes the way we see the problem. That is nonlinear wisdom. It doesn't hand us solutions. It dissolves the need for them. Linear thinking connects dots, builds maps, and charts out the future. Nonlinear insight steps back and realizes the truth was never on the map at all. It doesn't diagram the path, it sees through the illusion of paths. Some people can explain complex truths with perfect structure, yet still live with fear, control, and constant tension. They speak of enlightenment, but struggle to relax into the moment. Others may say very little, yet carry a stillness that says everything. Because they've stopped trying to mold life into a shape. They simply see it as it is. Non-linear wisdom isn't something you gain through effort. You don't earn it by pushing harder or planning smarter. It emerges when the old framework collapses, and you're left in a moment of stillness, empty but awake. No celebration, no revelation, just a different way of seeing, and those who see in this way don't feel superior. They don't compare themselves or strive to be special. What they see is enough, not because it's grand or profound, but because it is. They no longer search for a deeper meaning behind everything. They stop adding layers of explanation. They simply rest in the presence of what already is. That's why they live lightly. They don't overreact. They don't fix others. They don't obsess over understanding everything. Yet somehow in times of chaos, people find comfort in them. Without trying, they become the ones others turn to, because their calm doesn't come from answers. It comes from being unshaken, and still even this form of wisdom, so spacious, so free, can be. In the previous reflection, we explored how even non-linear wisdom can quietly be turned into another goal by the thinking mind. And once that happens, a subtle question emerges. How do I reach that state? How do I enter that kind of seeing? And just like that, the grasping mind returns. Linear thinking always needs a beginning, a method, and a finish line. It can't accept a way of being that goes nowhere. Every act must have a reason. Every path must be named. Every moment must point to something else. So even in the pursuit of spiritual insight, the mind begins to crave a structured journey, somewhere to get, something to gain, someone to become. But here's the hidden root of our unrest, this very need to be heading somewhere, that quiet hunger to improve, to arrive, to transform. It turns the present moment into nothing more than a stepping stone. We stop sitting simply to sit. We stop breathing just to breathe. We stop living for the sake of life itself. Instead, every experience becomes a tool, every second a currency spent in hopes of buying a better one. And so, life becomes suspended, hanging between what is and what might be. We chase peace across disciplines and doctrines. We move from one spiritual idea to another, hoping that maybe this system will deliver us to a final place, enlightenment, inner stillness, success, or awakening. But if peace isn't found right now, then when? A mind conditioned by paths and processes will always delay living. It turns life into a waiting room where presence is postponed in the name of progress. And the truth is, the present offers no trophies. There are no medals handed out for being still, no applause for awareness. There is only the quiet now. And for a mind addicted to striving, that feels like too little. But to step out of every path doesn't mean rejecting growth. It doesn't mean denying change. It simply means seeing that real transformation doesn't begin until there is no one left who is trying to transform. It's only when the striving stops, when we no longer stand in the posture of going somewhere, that we can finally be here. Not as a practice, not as a technique, but as a natural way of being, and this isn't a final destination. It's not the ultimate achievement. It's not the finish line at the end of a long road. It's what's always been here, quietly waiting, beneath every goal, behind every method, beyond every idea of who we should become. Thank you for listening, and for walking this path of insight with us. From everyone at Buddhism Echo, we wish you and your loved ones deep well-being, clarity, and peace, right here, right now.